The first thing I noticed was the way the waiter hesitated before approaching. He held the black bill folder delicately like it might detonate. His eyes flicked toward my brother, then my mother, then finally to me as if trying to find the least explosive option. He chose me. "Excuse me," he murmured, lowering the folder discreetly onto the table beside my untouched espresso. "The final bill." I blinked. "I think you meant to give that to my voice caught as I opened the folder. The line items scrolled like a silent indictment. Filet mignon, 2 bottles of Napa Reserve, lobster, kids' meals, custom cake, service charge, grand total 7/21/18, 55s. The name on the reservation A, Trent, the credit card mine. I stared at it like it belonged to someone else. Like maybe if I just looked hard enough it would blink into a different name. But no, there it was. My name. My old address. Even the last 4 digits of the card I thought I'd canceled 3 years ago after using it to book a surprise trip for my mom's birthday. Now it had resurfaced, without my knowledge, without my permission. And now I was apparently paying for a retirement party that I hadn't even been given a proper seat at. Let me back up for a second. My name is Aisley Trent. I'm 34 years old, a licensed architect based in Seattle. I specialize in residential eco-renovation, which is a fancy way of saying I turn broken things into something people want to come home to. Sometimes I wonder if I chose that path because it's what I wished I could have done with my family. I hadn't been home to Bloomington, Indiana in almost 3 years, not since the Thanksgiving my mother gave my bedroom to Landon's toddler and told me there was plenty of room at the Holiday Inn. That was the night I ate turkey alone in a room with brown carpet and broken Wi-Fi. I told myself I wouldn't go back unless it really mattered. Apparently, it mattered now. My mother, Cynthia Trent, had just retired after 32 years as a high school guidance counselor. My brother Landon was organizing a celebration at one of the town's most expensive restaurants. The message he sent was brief. "Mom would love it if you came." Not, "We'd love it," just Mom. Still, I bought the ticket. I chose the dress. I even wrapped a gift in architectural sketch I'd done of our childhood home. Sentimental, yes, but thoughtful. I thought maybe this time would be different, that maybe showing up was enough to be seen. What I didn't expect was to be seated at a table by the service station next to a fake ficus in the kitchen door. What I didn't expect was Landon's forced smile and his words, "Sorry, eyes. This table's for family only," as he gestured toward the long, candle-lit table where my mother, her friends, and the rest of the family had gathered. I'd swallowed the sting, smiled, took my seat beside an old neighbor and a distant cousin's girlfriend. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe it had been a mistake, that maybe I didn't need to be at the center of things, but then the bill came. And now, sitting with it open in front of me, the truth was unavoidable. It wasn't just about being excluded. It was about being used. I looked up. Landon was laughing at something Mom had said, reaching across the table to top off her champagne. Neither of them noticed the waiter. Neither of them looked at me. Not until I cleared my throat. "Did you put this on my card?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Landon looked over, his expression already defensive. "I mean, it's not a big deal, right? You've got it." What I said, more breath than voice. Mom turned her head slowly, eyes calm, voice cooler. "It just made sense, honey. You've done well for yourself. Landon's been running around organizing everything and you're comfortable, aren't you?" Comfortable. That word felt like a brick in my throat. I was comfortable enough to be their ATM, comfortable enough to fund the party, but not comfortable enough to sit at the main table. I closed the bill folder gently and set it aside. That's when the room finally noticed. That's when the quiet around our table grew louder than the laughter around theirs. That's when I realized every story I'd told myself about family being messy but loving was just that, a story. So here I am, holding the bill, staring at the table I'm not welcome at, realizing that for all my boundaries and distance and independence, I still wanted to belong. And they still wanted a place to put the invoice. But if they expected me to pay the cost of being excluded, they'd underestimated me. Let me take you back to the beginning because this story didn't start with a $7 $200 bill. It started long before that. With a house, a split, a little girl watching her family fracture, and a slow, quiet education in what it means to be part of something until one day you're not. And that's what I need to tell you. Because when someone tells you this table's for family only and then hands you the check, you have two choices: you swallow it, or you stand up. I chose the latter. But it took me a long, long time to get there, and it started as these things often do, with a lie that sounded a lot like love. They say the Midwest builds sturdy people, sturdy homes, sturdy values, sturdy silences. I grew up in Bloomington, Indiana, on a maple-lined street where everyone waved, but nobody really said much past. How about them Hoosiers? Our house was small but tidy, with a white porch swing that creaked like an old secret and shutters that never quite stayed straight after the first spring storm. We weren't wealthy, but we were for a while content. My mother, Cynthia, was a high school guidance counselor with a sharp eye and a voice that could stop hallway fights without raising in volume. She wore cardigans in every pastel known to man and believed in things like handwritten thank you notes and ironing t-shirts. My father, Christopher, was a mechanical engineer who read Popular Mechanics for fun and taught me how to use a level before I was tall enough to reach the wall without a stool. In those early years, I thought we were perfectly ordinary. Then came middle school and the slow unraveling that makes more sense in hindsight than it ever did in real time. I was 13 when the fights started. At first, they happened late at night, the kind you'd pretend not to hear with a pillow over your head. Then, they moved into the mornings, the kitchen, the front yard, loud enough that the neighbors stopped waving. I remember watching my mother pour her morning coffee and ask my father if he'd remembered to move the sprinkler, and he snapped that she could handle it herself if she was so organized. A fight about grass. But it was never really about grass. When they finally split, the announcement was more of a shrug than a storm. Dad moved into a small apartment with thin walls and linoleum floors. Landon and I stood in the driveway while the moving truck rumbled away, and for the first time I noticed how small he looked. He was only 10. I think we both expected the grown-ups to fix it eventually. They didn't. I split my time between houses at first, but it didn't take long for Cynthia to start making it harder. "It's just easier when you're here," she'd say with a tired smile, sliding meatloaf onto my plate. "You know how hard this is on Landon." So I stayed, even when I wanted to run, even when the air in that house felt sharp. Landon, though, he became the center of her gravity, the one who remembered to take out the trash, the one who stayed up late helping her hang curtains, the one who hugged her goodnight without flinching. He didn't talk back, didn't ask questions, didn't cry at the wrong times. He was the calm. I was the question mark. And soon it was obvious which one she preferred. It wasn't blatant, not at first. Just little things. "Landon's such a help," she'd say at Thanksgiving. Or, "I don't know what I'd do without him." Once, when I got accepted into a competitive summer architecture program in Chicago, she barely looked up from folding laundry. "Isn't that the weekend of your cousin's wedding?" she asked. When Landon won 3rd place in a regional robotics competition, she sent out a family-wide email with photos and a subject line that read, "Our genius." By the time I graduated high school, I was halfway out the door emotionally. When I told her I was moving to Seattle for college, farther than anyone in our family had ever lived, she paused at the sink and said, "Well, that's bold. You'll miss everything." Not, "We'll miss you." Just a passive inevitability. I left anyway. In Seattle, I built a different version of myself. I traded cornfields for coffee shops, football games for city lectures. I found people who didn't know how I used to be. I studied long hours designed late into the night and eventually landed a position at a small but promising firm. I rented a studio that leaked light in the best way and filled it with blueprint tubes and succulents I always forgot to water. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Back home, Landon stayed. He went to community college, then took a job at the local credit union. He married his high school girlfriend, bought a sensible car, had 2 kids before 30. He was consistent, available, visible. When Cynthia needed someone to fix the porch rail, he showed up. When she needed a date for a wedding, he wore the tie. She called him my rock. She called me when she needed tech help. Maybe. Once during a strained phone call about holiday plans, I told her I'd found cheap flights for a quick Christmas visit. She sighed and said, "Don't worry about it. Landon's here. That's what matters. That's what matters. I've played that sentence in my head more times than I can count. Not because I didn't expect it, but because deep down, I'd hoped the story might shift with time. That absence wouldn't mean erasure, that success, even from afar, might still count as love. But in our family, proximity was currency. Landon stayed, I left. And somehow, that became the only narrative that stuck. So when I got the invite to Mom's retirement party, part of me hesitated. I could have sent Flowers a card, a framed drawing of her first school building, but something told me to go. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was some buried belief that if I just showed up, really showed up, it would mean something. It did, just not in the way I expected. The call came on a rainy Thursday, the kind of gray Seattle day where the sky feels like it's resting just above your head. I was standing in the doorway of my apartment holding a mug that had long since gone cold when my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Mom. Not Cynthia in my contact list. Not home like it used to be. Just Mom sitting there like a question. I answered. Her voice came through clipped efficient. Hi, Isley. Just wanted to let you know we're doing a little dinner for my retirement next month. Nothing fancy. I waited. The pause was familiar, like she was waiting to see if I'd fill it, reassure her that yes, of course I'd be there, that I hadn't changed, that I was still the daughter who tried. Then came the line, the same one she always used when she didn't want to ask directly. It'd be nice if you showed up this time. This time. I closed my eyes, counted to 3. Swallowed every urge to remind her I had shown up last time for her birthday 2 years ago and ended up sitting between the coat rack and a drafty window while Landon gave a speech about how no one loves like Mom loves. I'd smiled through it, even clapped, but she forgot that part. Still, I said, sure. Just send me the details. There was a beat of what might have been surprise on her end. Well, good. Landon's handling the venue. It'll be at that little place on Kirkwood. Do you remember where I remember? And you don't need to worry about accommodations. Landon's kids are taking the guest room, but maybe we can fit an air mattress in the... It's fine. I'll book a hotel. Oh, if you'd rather? There it was again. That soft dip in her voice. Not guilt. Just disappointment dressed up like understanding. I let it hang between us. Then we moved on to weather traffic, her upcoming pedicure. 3 minutes later, the call ended, like most of ours did, with a polite goodbye that didn't quite sound like family. I booked the flight that evening, direct to Indianapolis Friday morning. I didn't tell her how much the ticket cost. I didn't tell her that I moved, meetings shifted, deadlines, postponed a project review just to carve out the time. She wouldn't have asked. Instead, I started thinking about the gift. She didn't need more candles, or scarves, or anything you could pick up in an airport shop. So I pulled out an old sketch pad from college and started drawing. The house we grew up in, her first house. The one with the crooked shutters and the swing that squeaked like a secret. I rendered it in soft graphite and watercolor just enough to make the white porch glow like memory. I added the pink geraniums she used to hang in baskets every May. Even the little crack in the third step that Dad never quite fixed. It took me 3 nights. I used the same brushes I hadn't touched in months. When it was done, I framed it in clean wood and wrapped it in brown paper. No ribbon, just a card. Thanks for building our beginning. I meant it. On Friday, I packed the drawing carefully between sweaters and slipped a pair of heels into the side pocket of my carry-on. My hotel confirmation was waiting in my inbox, 1 room, 1 bed facing away from the parking lot. I'd called ahead to request it. The plane ride was uneventful. A middle seat between a man who sneezed nonstop and a woman who read romance novels with the intensity of a surgeon. I kept my headphones in the entire time. No music, just silence to think. As we landed over the flat stretch of Indiana earth, something in my chest tightened. It wasn't fear exactly, just that old ache. The one that comes when you realize you're heading toward people who know your story, but not who you've become. At baggage claim, I texted Landon, just landed. See you tomorrow night. No response. No welcome back or need a ride. Just read and gone. When I got to the hotel, the clerk asked, "Here for business or family?" I paused. A little of both, I said, and slid my card across the counter. In the room, I stood by the window for a long time watching the line of bare trees sway against the February dusk. This was home, and not. The town where I learned to drive kissed a boy behind the science building, sat on the roof to watch thunderstorms, but hadn't truly belonged in over a decade. Still, I'd come. I was here. I'd brought something that mattered. And a small part of me hoped stupidly quietly that it would mean something to her, that when she opened the drawing she'd see it not just as a nice sketch, but as a piece of love from the daughter who didn't stay, but never stopped caring. I changed into jeans and a sweatshirt, ordered soup from a nearby diner, and pulled the curtains closed. Outside, the wind rattled the glass like a warning. Inside, I turned off my phone and let the silence settle in. Tomorrow, I'd show up. That had to count for something. The next evening, I drove across town to see Dad. He lived in a modest 2-bedroom condo near the edge of town, tucked behind an old strip mall and a half-empty pharmacy. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet, and the porch light still flickered the same warm way it used to when we'd come home from soccer games or school plays. He met me at the door with a grin that crinkled his eyes. There's my city girl. He smelled faintly of coffee and sawdust. Some things never changed. Inside, the kitchen was glowing. He'd made meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and steamed broccoli just like he used to when Mom worked late, and it was Dad dinner night. No frills. Just solid, simple food and the comfort of someone who still listened. We sat across from each other at his tiny round table, mismatched salt and pepper shakers between us. So he said, cutting into his meatloaf, "I hear there's a retirement shindig tomorrow." I nodded. At Westfield Grill. Pretty upscale. Landon booked it. Dad raised an eyebrow. I wasn't invited. I swallowed a piece of potato that suddenly felt dry. I figured. He shrugged with practiced nonchalance, but the corner of his mouth tightened. "Your mom wants things clean." That's how she put it. I sighed. Clean meaning no reminders of the divorce. Clean meaning no variables she can't control. He chuckled, but there wasn't much humor in it. "It's all right, Isley. I'm not surprised. Just funny, isn't it? She retires from teaching, but she's still grading people." That made me laugh, and Dad smiled. We ate a while in silence. He asked about work about the firm in Seattle, the new green space initiative I'd pitched. He was the only one in the family who ever seemed to remember the details, who knew the difference between what I did and what Landon told people I did. After we cleared the plates, he poured us both a bourbon. "How's your mom been?" he asked gently. I leaned back. "She's Cynthia." He nodded. "And Landon?" I hesitated. Still Landon. That made him chuckle. Gatekeeper of all things family. Exactly. That was the word I hadn't said out loud before. Gatekeeper. It wasn't just that Landon stayed behind. It was that over the years he'd become the voice that got heard, the filter everything passed through. If Mom didn't want to deal with confrontation, she'd say, "Ask Landon." If I wanted to send a birthday gift or suggest a visit, Landon would coordinate, which usually meant delay or disappear. And then there were the things I found out after the fact, like the baby shower I wasn't told about, or the time Mom had a minor procedure and Landon had said, "It's no big deal, you don't need to fly in." When I called her, she said, "Oh, I didn't want to bother you." Gatekeeping wasn't just logistical. It was relational. It was subtle and soft-edged and impossible to point to without sounding paranoid. But it worked. On the way back to the hotel, I checked my email. A new message had come in from Westfield Grill. I clicked it open without much thought, probably just a confirmation for the event. Except it wasn't addressed to Landon. Reservation confirmation for Isley Trent party of 28. Private dining, 7:00 p.m. Saturday. Feb 17 final menu selections confirmed. Remaining balance to be settled on site. I stared at it. My name. Not Landon's, not Cynthia's. Mine. I scrolled again. No mistake. There was an attachment, a PDF invoice. I opened it. The total was in the bottom right corner, bold and clean. $7,200. My breath caught. I looked at the sender info again. The email had been booked through a shared account linked to my old business card, one I'd let Mom use once 3 years ago when she and Landon had visited Seattle, and the hotel booking system hadn't accepted her debit card. I'd forgotten to cancel it. Apparently she hadn't. I sat there in the driver's seat, the car idling in the hotel parking lot, staring at the amount. The rest of the family didn't even know I was footing the reservation, did they? This wasn't just an oversight. This was a setup. I thought of the drawing I'd brought, the one sitting neatly in my suitcase, wrapped in brown paper tied with twine. A gift meant to say, "You matter to me." A gift that now felt foolish. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat there with my hands frozen on the steering wheel, staring at the flicker of the hotel's neon vacancy sign. For the first time in a long time, I felt the familiar chill of being the outsider, invited but not included. Needed, but not welcomed. And the storm hadn't even started yet. I arrived early. Not intentionally, I'm just built that way. Early is safe. Early means I can brace myself before the show begins. I stood outside Westfield Grill for a minute, watching my reflection blur in the glass as the winter wind whipped around my coat. The gift box was tucked under my arm, still wrapped in the same brown paper and twine I'd tied in my Seattle apartment a week ago. Inside was the hand-drawn rendering of the house we grew up in, every window, every warped porch step drawn from memory. A quiet offering. I thought it might mean something. I thought it might help. When I stepped inside, the warmth hit me fast. Soft piano music floated through the speakers. The air smelled like rosemary butter and expensive intentions. A hostess in a black dress and neat ponytail greeted me with a rehearsed smile. "Hi there, welcome to Westfield Grill. Are you with a reservation?" I opened my mouth, hesitated. "It's for a retirement dinner, Cynthia Trent." She glanced down at her iPad, then up again. "Ah, yes. Reservation under A. Trent. Right this way." I froze. "Sorry, under what name?" "A. Trent," she repeated, already turning. I followed, stunned, silent. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor as we weaved through the half-empty dining room toward a glass-walled private area near the back. Inside, the long table was set with cream linens and gold chargers. Water glasses sparkled under the pendant lights. Candles were already lit. It looked like a wedding reception. The room was empty except for me. The hostess gestured with an open hand. "Please make yourself comfortable. Your guests will be arriving shortly." I nodded, still clutching the box like it might anchor me to the floor. She smiled and left. I walked to the end of the table. Name cards were already set out in delicate script. Mom at the head. Landon and Callie. Tyler and Amanda. Barbara. Nate. Aunt Willa. The names curved neatly along the tablecloth in 2 perfect rows. Mine was halfway down. One from the end. Next to Barbara, my mother's childhood friend, who once told me in 5th grade I was a bit too opinionated for a little girl. I placed the box at the empty seat and sat down, spine-straight, hands folded. I stared at the centerpiece eucalyptus and white tulips and waited. The first to arrive was Aunt Willa. She stepped into the room in a swirl of perfume and burgundy wool. "Isley," she said, startled. "Well, would you look at that? They said you probably wouldn't come." I stood to greet her. "Nice to see you, Aunt Willa." She kissed my cheek with cool lips and lowered herself into the seat 2 down. "How's Seattle still?" "Wet, still wet." Others trickled in after that. Nate and his new girlfriend, a couple of Mom's old co-workers, a neighbor I barely recognized but remembered from the block parties. Most of them blinked at me in surprise, offering greetings like I was a distant cousin they'd heard about but never quite pictured showing up. Someone asked, "You're the architect, right?" "In Oregon, Seattle," I corrected with a smile. Cynthia arrived 20 minutes late naturally. She made an entrance hairset scarf draped over her coat like she'd walked off the cover of Midwest Living. Landon and his wife Callie followed close behind, shepherding their 2 kids, Tyler and Amanda, with practiced Pinterest-worthy energy. The moment Mom stepped into the room, there was applause. Light, polite, obligatory. She beamed. Kissed cheeks, hugged shoulders, complimented shoes. The center of gravity shifted and the orbit of conversation rotated around her immediately. She reached my part of the table. I stood the box in my hands. "Happy retirement, Mom. I made something for you." She glanced at the package. "Oh," she said lightly, then turned to greet Barbara with a louder, "You made it?" I was still holding the box. No one noticed. I placed it beside her seat and returned to mine. Across the table, Landon caught my eye. He smiled like nothing was wrong. I wondered if he even knew the reservation was in my name, or if that was part of the script too. Callie was already pouring wine. Amanda was snapping selfies with the candlelight. Cynthia sat at the head of the table, eyes scanning the room like she was counting RSVPs. "Well," she said, tapping her glass, "we made it." And for a moment I believed she might look at me, acknowledge me, thank me for the booking, the effort, the flight, the drawing. She didn't. She adjusted her scarf and said to no one in particular, "This is the table where everything began." I looked around that table, all linen and light, people I knew and people I didn't, laughter in little circles that I wasn't part of. It was already clear I hadn't been invited to be part of this. I'd been cast to support it. I reached for my water glass and my hand shook slightly. The script had begun. And I was already reading from the wrong page. I'd barely touched the appetizer plate in front of me, some kind of puff pastry with goat cheese and fig jam, when Landon stood and gestured toward the back of the room. "Hey, Ice," he said casually, like he was asking me to pass the salt. "Actually, we were thinking, maybe it'd be better if you sat over here." His hand swept toward a small round table near the busing station. 4 chairs, no centerpiece. A folded card in the middle read in looping calligraphy, "Overflow guests." At first I thought I'd misheard him. I blinked. Sorry what he smiled the way someone smiles when they've already decided how this story ends. It's really tight up here. We had a few surprise relatives show up and Mom wanted to keep things kind of, close-knit. Just immediate family. I stared at him. I am immediate family. He gave a sheepish shrug. "You know what I mean." No one said anything. The room, mid-conversation a moment before, fell into a hush so swift it felt choreographed. I could feel the eyes on me skimming my back like cold water. Cynthia didn't even look up from her wine. She just smoothed her napkin across her lap and said nothing. Barbara gave a tight smile and looked away. Amanda looked directly at me, then down, then back up again, like she was watching a slow-motion car crash. Even Aunt Willa, who I could always count on to say the uncomfortable thing out loud, sat frozen her fork, poised midair like a figure in a wax museum. I stood slowly, heart-thudding. So this table is what exactly? Landon glanced at the folded card and chuckled. "Overflow guests. It's no big deal. You'll have more space over there, actually. Easier to talk." I followed his gesture again. The table was tucked beside the hallway to the restrooms barely lit. Behind it, a server dumped a tray of dirty water glasses into a bus tub. The clatter rang in my ears. I turned to Cynthia. "Mom." She still didn't look at me, just took a long sip of her Pinot Grigio and adjusted the silverware in front of her like it was the most pressing matter in the room. I swallowed hard. "Are you really okay with this?" She glanced up briefly. "It's just a table, Eiley. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene." The words landed like a slap across the face, not loud, not violent, but practiced. Rehearsed. The kind of sentence that gets passed down like china fragile sharp, always displayed in the moments you most want to hide. I stood there for another second too long, just enough time for the silence to grow teeth. Then I reached for my napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it beside my untouched plate. Without a word, I walked toward the overflow table. My heels made that same soft click against the hardwood as when I arrived, but now it echoed. It wasn't the sound of arriving early, it was the sound of being noticed too late. I sat down at the round table. No one joined me. The server passed by, did a double take, then offered a quick, uncomfortable smile. "Need anything to drink?" "Just water," I said. He returned with a glass and a flicker of pity I hated myself for accepting. I looked back at the long table. They were already reabsorbed in themselves, laughing, toasting, chattering like nothing had happened. Like this was all natural. Like I hadn't just been publicly nudged out of the picture like someone who wandered into a family photo uninvited. Landon leaned in toward Cynthia and said something that made her smile. Amanda clinked her glass with Tyler's. Barbara gestured animatedly with her fork, telling some story I used to be part of. And I sat 15 feet away beside a folded card that might as well have read, "Not one of us." I glanced down at the water glass, watching the condensation trail down like sweat. The tablecloth had a faint stain near the edge, probably coffee, maybe gravy. I traced it with my fingertip and thought about the drawing in the gift box still unopened beside Cynthia's seat. Thought about the flight, the hotel, the moment 3 years ago when I let Landon use my card for a temporary reservation deposit he never paid back. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice, and I'd let them keep making it. I sat in silence for a few more minutes, hands folded in my lap, trying to remember the last time I felt like part of this family. The answer didn't come. Only the hum of the busing station behind me, the faint clatter of silverware, and my own voice echoing softly in my mind. "It's just a table, Isley. Don't make a scene." But maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop playing quiet. I sat at the overflow table, staring at the tiny centerpiece, an LED candle in a mason jar with plastic pebbles. A server had kindly brought me water and a bread basket no one else seemed to touch. From my angle near the service station, I had a perfect view of the main table glowing under chandeliers, everyone laughing like they were in a commercial for happy families and expensive salads. Then, the DJ cleared his throat. "We're going to begin the gift presentations now, folks. Let's show Cynthia how much we love and appreciate her for 38 years of shaping young minds." Landon stood first naturally. He always made sure to go first before anyone else could cast a longer shadow. He took the mic and said, "Mom, you gave your entire career to your students. So my wife and I thought, maybe it's time you let someone else do the grading for a while." He turned and held up a glossy brochure with a cruise ship on the front. 2 weeks, Mediterranean, balcony suite. People clapped like he'd just saved her from drowning. Cynthia did that little hand-over-mouth gesture she always used when trying to look surprised, but I could tell she already knew. Her voice quivered just enough to seem moved. "Oh, Landon, wow, that's perfect." Then came the cascade of smaller gifts, flowers, a foot spa, a book of crossword puzzles from a fellow retired teacher. I sat still, my wrapped gift tucked under my chair. I hadn't planned to give it anymore. Honestly, I wasn't sure why I still had it in my hand. But someone announced, "And we have one more gift. This one's from Aisley." All heads turned. People looked genuinely surprised I was still there. A few clapped out of reflex or discomfort. I stood up slowly, knees stiff, and carried the slim box toward the long table. Landon didn't offer to help. Cynthia didn't stand. I placed the wrapped frame in front of her. "It's just a sketch," I said quietly, "of the house on Watson Street, where we grew up." Cynthia peeled the paper back. Inside was my architectural rendering, detailed, shadowed with charcoal and soft watercolor, capturing the porch swing, the bent mailbox, the maple tree I used to climb. The house we lost in the divorce. The one she once told me she didn't want to remember. She tilted her head. "Oh, you drew something." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. A few polite hums and scattered claps from the outer tables. Someone cleared their throat too loudly. Cynthia put the frame down, glass side down, and reached for her wine. I stood there a beat too long, then nodded and walked back to my seat. I should have known. You don't give a memory to someone who spent years pretending it didn't happen. Just as I sat, a waiter approached. Young, maybe 20, nervous. He carried a black folder with a slip of white paper inside and stopped in front of me. "Miss Trent?" he asked. I looked up. "Yes," he checked the bill. "The balance is due tonight. The reservation's under A. Trent. You used a card ending in 8209, I blinked. What? He tapped the slip. "We pre-authorized it when the deposit was made 2 weeks ago." I took the bill. The name was mine. The card? I recognized the number. It was an old backup I'd once used when buying a surprise flight for Mom years ago. Apparently, it had been saved. Total $238.41. For dinner, wine, cake, DJ, Gratuity. I looked past the waiter to the main table. Landon was laughing at something Cynthia swirling her wine. Neither one looked at me. I stood slowly. The folder trembled in my hand. "Excuse me," I said. The DJ turned down the music. Conversations softened. I stepped toward the center of the room and said, "There's been a mistake. The dinner. It's under my name. My card." Now they looked. I wasn't consulted, wasn't told. And tonight I was told this table was for family only. I let the sentence land. No one said a word. A fork clinked on china. I turned to the waiter. "I'm not paying this bill." He nodded once relieved and stepped away to find a manager. Back at the main table, Landon finally looked up. "What's the big deal?" he called loud enough for the whole room. "You make 6 figures, don't you?" I stared at him. So that's the math now. If someone has more, they owe more. Cynthia stood reaching for composure. "Isley, let's not ruin the evening." "It was already ruined," I said. "You just didn't notice because you were too busy playing the family you wanted." And with that, I turned and walked out. I heard the DJ fumble for the music again, the chatter resuming like someone had hit play on a paused scene. But the spell had cracked, and I wasn't holding it together for them anymore. For a moment, I just stared at the bill in my hand. It was printed on stiff ivory cardstock, not the usual receipt. At the bottom in bold balance due 7-13 $42 card on file A. Trent. It was surreal, like watching someone else's bad dream unfold through my eyes. I looked up and the waiter was still standing there, uncomfortable but doing his job. Landon didn't even glance my way. Cynthia took a sip of wine and commented to Aunt Shelley about the salmon. "Excuse me," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. Several heads turned. I stood holding the paper delicately like it might catch fire. "Apparently the dinner has been charged to me," I said. I never agreed to this." The room quieted. Cynthia turned slowly toward me. "Honey," she said, setting down her glass. "You've done so well." It just made sense. I blinked. Made sense. How Landon chimed in, grinning like this was a misunderstanding, a quirky little mix-up. "It's not a big deal. You wanted to contribute, right? You live in Seattle. Tech-adjacent architecture. It's just dinner. A $7,000 dinner," I said. My voice was still steady, but I could feel my hands trembling. "And no one told me. Not once. You invited me here. You didn't say I'd be paying for the whole party. You didn't even sit me at the same table." A few people shifted awkwardly in their seats. Aunt Shelley coughed. A cousin of ours whispered something to her husband. Across the room, I saw my dad's cousin Ethan give me a slow, sympathetic nod. At the main table, Landon rolled his eyes and leaned back like he'd been forced to endure this too many times before. I walked to the front, past the gift table, past the stage where Cynthia's employee of the decade slideshow had looped earlier. I turned to face them, not just Cynthia and Landon, but everyone. The room was full of people who had watched me grow up, who had seen my mom braid my hair for Easter Sunday, and now watched her not say a single word in my defense. I flew across the country I began. I took time off work. I bought a gift that I poured hours into. I gestured toward the framed sketch still leaning against the wall unopened. And when I arrived, I was told there was no seat for me. That this table is for family only. Silence. I thought maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe it was all in my head. But now I'm holding a bill for a party I wasn't even allowed to attend properly. A party that apparently I was expected to finance without being told, without consent, and without kindness. Cynthia's smile faltered. Landon looked annoyed now, like I'd taken it too far. He stood up. "Come on, Aisley, it's just money. You're always so—" "No," I cut in. "Don't make this about money. This is about respect. Or the lack of it." My voice cracked then. Not out of weakness, but because I was finally saying the thing I hadn't had the courage to say for years. "You asked me to dinner, then billed me for it, and didn't give me a seat at your table." Cynthia opened her mouth, closed it again. I turned to the waiter and handed the bill back. "I won't be covering this. Whoever put this under my name did so without my permission." The waiter nodded slowly. "Of course, ma'am." And then I walked, past every relative who didn't speak up, past Landon's kids who looked confused, past the party planner holding a clipboard and blinking fast. Outside the restaurant, the night was sharp and cold. I didn't have my coat. I didn't have a ride. But for the first time in years, I had my voice, and I'd finally used it. I stood near the doorway, the crisp air from outside curling around my ankles like a warning or a breath of relief. But before I could step all the way out, a voice behind me called out not loudly, but loud enough to stop a few whispers mid-sentence. "Isley, Uncle Robert said." He stood slowly from his chair at the second table, the one wedged in awkwardly behind the wine station. She was excluded at Thanksgiving, too. I turned. Everyone did. His wife, Aunt Gloria, looked startled, but she didn't stop him. He wasn't the type to cause scenes. I couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken up at any family gathering, but now his eyes were fixed on Cynthia and Landon. "She flew in last November." He continued, his voice growing steadier. "Stayed in a hotel, brought a pie, and was told there was no space left at the table. You said it was a small gathering. Then I saw the photos. You had 22 people packed in your house. Murmurs, chairs shifting. Someone coughed. Cynthia's mouth moved, but no sound came. I didn't know what to say. I had internalized that memory so deeply I hadn't even planned to bring it up. It had just become part of the pattern, the quiet shame I carried back to Seattle with me after every holiday. But now it was in the open. Then another voice. "We were told you didn't want to come." It was my cousin Janelle standing now too. She looked between me and Cynthia. "At Easter we asked where you were. Landon said you had better things to do, that you were too West Coast for us now." I felt a jolt in my chest. Not pain exactly, but a sudden recognition. All these years I thought I'd been retreating out of choice. Turns out I'd been edited out systematically. Janelle continued. "But I remember when you used to organize the Easter egg hunt. You were always the one who made the signs, the little clues." Landon finally stood. "Can we not turn this into a witch hunt? Too late for that," said Uncle Robert. I felt my phone buzz in my purse, a tiny vibration. I slipped it out and glanced at the screen. A message from an unfamiliar number, but the name that popped up made my throat tighten. Natalie Landon's ex. I tapped it open. "He used my info once too, for a vet bill. Said it was a mistake. Check your bank. He's got patterns." I stared at the screen for a second longer than I should have, letting the meaning settle in. My heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the sense that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining all the little things, the unexplained charge from 3 years ago, the hotel reservation once made in my name without me booking it, the time Cynthia had accidentally shipped Landon's kids' birthday gifts using my Amazon account. I tucked the phone away, looked at Landon. "This isn't about dinner." I said, my voice quieter now but sharper, like a wire pulled tight. "It's about years of me playing the outsider because you cast me in that role. Because you made it easier to keep me just far enough away to use, but never close enough to consider." Cynthia flinched. "You all made it look like I walked away. Like I chose to be distant. But what I did, what I've done, is survive being quietly erased." No one interrupted. Even the server behind the bar froze mid-pour. "I thought maybe if I worked hard enough, succeeded, far enough, gave nicely enough, you'd let me back in. But it was never about what I gave. It was about the story you wanted to tell. And in that story, I was inconvenient." A long silence stretched. For once, Landon didn't have a quip. Cynthia didn't have a polished deflection. Instead, people were looking at me, really looking, and then shifting their gaze toward the people who'd been holding the script all along. Aunt Gloria stood. "I remember when Isley sent flowers for your birthday last year, Cynthia. You said they were from someone at work." I was confused, but now, I get it. The weight in the room shifted, not all at once, but like dominoes falling slowly. Every unsaid thing suddenly had room to breathe. Landon muttered, "You're all making this into something it's not," but no one jumped in to save him. I looked over at the gift table. My sketch still leaned unopened. No one had even thought to display it. Next to it was the cruise packet Landon had given Cynthia. Big, flashy, easy to brag about on Facebook. Cynthia stood finally. Her voice was calm, but brittle. Isley, I never intended. That's the problem, I cut in gently. You never intended. You just allowed. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even bitter. It was just the truth. And in that moment, I could tell truth was enough. The air outside hit me like a sigh I hadn't realized I was holding. I stepped onto the sidewalk, heels clicking against the concrete, the lights from the restaurant still warming the back of my neck like a spotlight I couldn't shake. And there he was. Leaning casually against his old Buick, hands in the pockets of his zip-up fleece, was my dad. Christopher Trent, baseball cap, slight slouch, same eyes as mine. He didn't wave. He just nodded like we were already mid-conversation. Hey, kid. My throat tightened. Hey! He pulled open the passenger side door without a word, like he knew I'd want to sit first. Like he knew standing right now might break whatever invisible spine I'd kept stiff for the last 2 hours. I sank into the seat and stared ahead. He got in, turned the key, and let the silence sit with us for a while like a passenger who also deserved its own space. You hungry? He asked after a beat. Starving, I said. And I didn't even realize it was true until I said it. He pulled out of the lot and turned down the old highway like muscle memory. No GPS needed. 5 minutes later, we were parked under the flickering neon sign of Duffy's Drive-In, home of onion rings the size of your fist and shakes thick enough to bend a spoon. Dad leaned out the window and ordered like he always had, 1 cheeseburger, 1 veggie burger with extra pickles and no judgment, 2 root beers and a side of fries to share, but not equally. As we waited, he finally spoke. So? I heard. I didn't ask how. He always heard, even if he wasn't invited. Didn't expect it to be so. I trailed off. Pointed, he offered. Cruel, I said. He nodded. Your mom's good at pageantry. Always has been. I looked over at him, silhouetted against the red dashboard glow. You think I overreacted? He turned to face me then. Really turned. Isley, you could have flipped every table in that room and walked out with their car keys and you still wouldn't have overreacted. I laughed quick and dry. I just gave a toast. You gave them the truth. People don't handle that real well, especially if they've been rewriting it for a while. The server came out with our tray. Dad paid cash, handed me my veggie burger like he was passing a baton in a relay, and took a long sip of his root beer before speaking again. I saw your drawing, he said almost gently. I blinked. What? The house? You sketched it, didn't you? I saw you working on it last summer. My stomach twisted. She didn't even unwrap it. She couldn't. Why? Because it's the one thing in that whole room she couldn't spin. He took another sip. It's proof of what you remember, of what we built before everything cracked. The food was warm in my lap, but my appetite had shifted. Still, I unwrapped the burger and took a bite, and for the first time that day, I tasted something that felt solid. You're still my daughter, he said quietly. Still family. No seating chart changes that. I nodded, looked out at the dim-lit lot, the cars of teenagers, the couple in the booth across the way, leaning in with quiet smiles. I don't think I want to go back, I said. You don't have to, he replied. Not if the cost is being invisible. I glanced over at him. Thanks for showing up. I always do, he said simply. You just stopped expecting me to. That one landed like a stone in still water. We ate in silence after that, the kind that doesn't beg to be filled. When we were done, he crumpled the wrappers, tucked the tray back on the dash, and turned the car back toward my hotel. As he drove, I leaned my head against the window and let the soft sound of the tires in the oldies station fill the space between us. He didn't ask for a recap, didn't need one. He'd shown up. That was enough. And maybe for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone had stepped toward me, not just away. My phone buzzed just after 7. I was already up, half-packed, half-awake, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed with my coffee cooling on the nightstand and yesterday's dress still hanging in the open closet. Cynthia, breakfast before your flight. Just us. I stared at the message longer than necessary, rereading the last 2 words like they carried weight. Just us. I didn't know if it was an offer or a trap. I replied with a simple sure. The diner was quiet, tucked between a dry cleaner and a florist I vaguely remembered from high school. She picked the booth near the back already halfway through a cup of tea when I arrived. She didn't stand to greet me, but she did slide the sugar my way. A small gesture, maybe even a peace offering. "You look tired," she said. I folded the menu without reading it. "Didn't sleep much." She nodded, not pressing. "I didn't think you'd say yes. Neither did I." The waitress came and went quickly. Coffee for me, another tea for her, and 2 plates of eggs and toast we barely touched. Cynthia stirred her cup like it was a clock ticking. Then finally she spoke. "You were right to be upset." I didn't say anything. She looked at her spoon, not me. I let Landon run things because he stayed. I told myself that was fair, that proximity made him more helpful, more thoughtful. But really, it was just easier. I took a sip of my coffee, and I was... She set her spoon down. "You were gone. Seattle, architecture, busy, independent. That's not a flaw." "I know," she said quickly, "but it made me feel irrelevant. Like your life kept moving and I didn't know how to be part of it." I blinked. "So you punished me?" She flinched, not dramatically, just a twitch in the jaw. "I didn't mean to, but yes, I think I did." The words hung there awkward and unfinished. Not an apology, but something close. "I didn't even realize the restaurant was under your name until the check came." She added, quieter now. "Landon handled the reservation. Said it was all covered. I assumed..." "You assumed I'd pay for the dinner I wasn't invited to properly attend. I assumed you wouldn't mind," she said like that was somehow better. I shook my head. "That's the problem, Mom. You assume so much and ask so little." She looked up then. "You think I don't love you, don't you?" I hesitated. "I think you loved the version of me who didn't need anything from you. And once I started setting boundaries, you chose the child who never did." She didn't deny it. She didn't argue. "I watched you ignore my gift," I said, voice low. "A drawing of the house you raised us in. Do you know how long that took?" She touched her tea but didn't drink. I was afraid of it. That sketch was memory. And maybe guilt. And maybe I didn't want to be reminded that I let something good rot from the inside. That cracked something in me. Not forgiveness, but understanding. "I didn't expect you to be perfect," I said, "but I did expect to be seen." Her eyes met mine. "You are. I just didn't know how to show it in a way you'd believe." We sat in that silence for a while. She reached into her bag and slid something across the table my drawing now framed. "I looked at it last night," she said. Really looked. I took it, not sure what to do with the weight of that gesture. "You still leaving today?" she asked. "I have work in the morning." "Come by for Easter," she said. "No fancy dinner, just ham and board games." "We'll see," I said. She nodded as if she already knew that was the best she could get. I stood first. She didn't reach for a hug, and I didn't offer one. But as I turned to leave, she said, "Easily." I paused. "Thank you. For showing up anyway." This time I didn't need to reply. Some truths didn't need to be wrapped in bows or punctuated with hugs. They just needed to be spoken and heard. The text came just after noon. "Landon, can we talk? Just us." In the lobby. For a full minute I considered ignoring it. I was half-packed again this time, for real, my suitcase open like a wound on the hotel bed. My return flight was in 3 hours. I didn't need closure. But maybe I needed to look him in the eye when I said I wasn't sorry for finally speaking. The hotel lobby smelled like old carpet and lemon polish. Muted conversations, clicking heels, a child whining softly near the elevator. Landon was already seated near the window, fiddling with the cardboard sleeve on his coffee. He stood when I walked up. "Hey." I didn't answer, just pulled out the chair across from him. He sat too, leaning forward like this was a negotiation. "I messed up," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "Badly." "I know." I raised an eyebrow. "Which part?" He sighed, rubbed the back of his neck. "All of it. The bill, the table. Letting Mom stay quiet while you were humiliated. I didn't mean for it to go that far." "But it did," I said. Because you set it up that way. He blinked. I didn't think you'd come, honestly. You usually don't. Because it's never really a seat for me, Landon. It's always a favor. Or a corner. Or this time a damn invoice. He winced. I thought if I took care of the logistics, if I gave Mom the night she wanted, then maybe I could, I don't know, be the one who finally gave her something real, something full. So you gave her a cruise, I said flatly, and used my card to pay for the evening. That was a mistake. No, Landon, leaving a light on overnight is a mistake. Charging your sister $7,000 without asking is a choice. He looked like he'd shrink inside his sweater. I wanted to keep control of the event, the narrative, the image. And I was what collateral he didn't answer. That was answer enough. You always had Mom's attention, I said. You didn't need to take mine too. That's not what I wanted, but that's what you did. He leaned back, eyes glinting under the lobby light. You left ICE. You moved across the country, built this big life. I stayed. I took care of things. I drove her to surgery, shoveled her walk. But when she talks about success, it's you. I sat with that for a beat. So this was about envy. Not exactly. It's just, I didn't want to be the son who couldn't give her everything. I wanted her to be proud of me the way she is of you. I stared at him. So you took from me, not just money. You took the table, the night, my dignity, and left me with the bill. His eyes lowered. Yeah, there it was. Finally. I should have told the waiter to tear it up, he added, voice smaller now. I should have stopped it. But you didn't, I said, because it worked for you. For one night, you were the center, and I was the stranger who paid the tab. He nodded slowly. I don't expect you to forgive me. Good, I said, because I'm not ready to. He exhaled long and heavy. But I'm going to wire you the full amount today, plus interest, and I already called the restaurant. Told them you didn't authorize it. Damage is done, Landon. But it's a start. He looked up. I know I can't fix what I broke, but if someday you want to be in the same room again, without a table between us or a bill, just say the word. I didn't reply. Outside, the sky was turning. One of those late winter grays that sits between storm and thaw. Maybe that's where we were now. Not reconciliation, not storm, but something in between. A slow melt. I'm checking out, I said, standing. He rose too. Safe flight. I nodded. Next time, Landon, try giving without taking. And then I walked out the door, sighing shut behind me. Seattle greeted me the same way it always did, overcast, a little damp and quietly defiant, like the city itself understood what it meant to carry weight and still stand tall. I rolled my suitcase up the steps to my apartment key already in hand, the framed sketch of our childhood house tucked under my arm. It hadn't been unwrapped at the party. Cynthia hadn't even acknowledged it, but I had brought it home anyway because it mattered to me. Inside, the silence was soothing. No clinking glasses, no strained laughter or pointed silences. Just me, a kettle starting to hum, and the echo of my own breathing as I walked to the wall opposite my desk. I measured with my hands and hung the frame right in the center. The lines of the house were soft and familiar. A sketch from memory, from care, not from obligation. I stared at it for a moment and whispered, "You're home now." The next morning, I did something I'd been meaning to do for years. I booked a therapy appointment. No more pushing the wounds down just to get through the day. No more pretending family didn't leave marks. I met Dana, a quiet woman with kind, intelligent eyes who let me talk at my own pace. When I told her about the bill, about how my mother's retirement dinner was booked under my name, paid with my old card without my consent, she didn't blink. She just said that must have felt like being erased and used at the same time. It was the closest anyone had come to naming what I felt. In the weeks that followed, my life didn't transform overnight. But it shifted, subtly, solidly. Dad started sending weekly video messages, short ones, sometimes rambling about his tomatoes, sometimes just him reading from the local paper like I was across the table from him. He never mentioned Cynthia or Landon. He didn't need to. His presence was its own kind of repair. Then came a call I hadn't expected. a woman named Elise, head of compliance at Landon's firm. She asked if I had a few moments to verify some charges. She spoke carefully legally. Apparently, there had been multiple incidents of account misuse flagged in an internal audit. The restaurant bill wasn't the first or the last. I answered her questions honestly. I didn't ask for consequences. I didn't threaten. I just said, he used my card without permission. She paused before saying, "Thank you. That matches the pattern." A week later, Landon's LinkedIn said currently seeking new opportunities. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt done. Around Easter, a card arrived. Simple cream envelope, no return address. Just my name. Inside a single sentence in my mother's loopy handwriting, still learning. There was no apology, but also no defense. No cruise brochures, no guilt-laced questions. Just that. And honestly, that might have been enough. By spring, I hosted a dinner. Not a party. Just a dinner. 6 friends, 3 of whom brought folding chairs. My dining room wasn't fancy, but it was full of stories of clatter of chosen family. I didn't print menus or assign seats. There was no head of the table, no silent measuring of who deserved what. Just good food, mismatched wine glasses, and people who didn't ask me to prove I belonged. At one point, my friend Kaya leaned over and said, "You're different lately. Not in a bad way. Just more grounded." I smiled, pouring her more wine. Maybe I finally stopped trying to get a seat at a table that was never meant to include me. Because that's what it had always been. A performance. A quiet audition for a part in a family narrative that didn't have space for me as I was. And once I stopped auditioning, once I named the rejection for what it was, I was free to build something better. Not perfect, but real. Not polite, but honest. And that table, the one in my little dining room with paint scratches and one leg shorter than the others, it's mine.